morning, everyone. It's 9:30, and so I think we're going to get started, and then folks will join us as they're available. So I just wanted to say thank you to everyone who's joined us today for this training session. This is something that we do annually, so we're happy to have the number of folks that are on today. So it is a training day, and if you guys have any questions throughout when we're presenting, just please feel free to interject. You can raise your hand or unmute yourselves. This is meant to be interactive, and we were going to try to do this in person, a hybrid type model, but I think there's a lot of stuff floating around in the air, so we felt it best to keep it at virtual. And plus, it's easier for people to maybe contribute a day of training if they're in their own learning environment. So thanks so much for joining us. I'm just gonna, I think I know everybody that I saw the names popping up, but for those who don't know me, I'm Jacqueline Leger. I'm the HRPP director. And I have our team members are here today, but Dominique's going to do an introductory part, so you'll get to meet the members of the team. So I'm just going to hand it over to Dominique. I have your slides here, Dominique, and just let me know when you want to move ahead.
Yeah, I muted.
Dominique, I have some poll questions if you want to get that started before you. It's up to you.
It's up to you too, really.
Okay.
Yep. Why don't we start with the poll? That might be a good icebreaker.
Sure. Yeah, I have a couple of poll questions to get, to kick things off here. So let's start with one question. First question. So do you see the screen popping up?
Yep.
Okay, how are you feeling today? And most of you are feeling good. Great. Just okay. That's pretty good. Okay, that's awesome. 22 response, and I think most of you have responded. There's a few just joining. I'm gonna let the person in. Okay, there you go. Okay, thank you very much. And the next question, these are all easy questions. There's no hard ones here. Next question is, which therapeutic area of clinical research are you currently in? So your department that you work in, I think. So you can type in and click submit, and it will show we have pharmacy, clinical trials, oncology, research services, cardiac, research clerk, geriatric, pulmonology, REB, social pediatrics, hematology. Yeah, we have really diverse group here. And who am I missing? Spine. So I assume the East Spine Center. An ankle health program. Yeah. Good. Thank you, guys. It's good to see people, from different groups.
Yep.
And the last question for now is, what is your role in your research team? Oh, research assistant, operation manager, research coordinator, study coordinator, admin support, assistant, research nurse, study coordinator. Great. Data coordinator. And I see a problem. That could be that position. That could be your role too. Yeah, that's kind of important too, right? Okay. Okay, thank you very much. I think for now we're ending the poll, and Dominique, take it away. Yeah.
Right. And I know, Jacqueline, if you're doing the slides for me.
I am.
The first one. So welcome everybody to our yearly workshop on the introductions to clinical trials. My name is Dominique Richard, and I'm manager of HR operation for research services. And as mentioned by Stella earlier, just before we start digging into the specifics of clinical trials, I just want to provide a brief overview of research services, basically who we are, what we do, and how we function, especially as we have some relatively new research staff who have joined Horizon. First slide, please. The one with the infrastructure?
Yep. Can you see it?
Yep. Yes, just a second. Yeah, so as you are more likely aware, there are two health authorities in New Brunswick. Excuse me, Horizon Health Network and Vitalité Health Network. Horizon Health Network, it consists of 12 hospitals and 45 health centers and serves a population of roughly 500,000 New Brunswickers. Our hospitals and health centers are, for the most part, located in the south to central New Brunswick, while Vitalité Health Network hospitals and centers are located in the northern part of the province. Excuse me. Research Services has 3 offices in Fredericton, Moncton, and St. John. Stella is our only research service staff in Fredericton. She can vouch for that. In Moncton, there's myself, Stephanie, and Karine, who will both be presenting today, and Dami, our research clerk. The rest of the research service staff have their office in Hilliard Place in St. John. So the next slide, excuse me again, provides an overview of our functional organization. So if you look at the first little, I guess, gray circle on the left, that is our accreditation of for HRPP. So I would say that the standard or pillar by which research services is conducted at Horizon is really the Human Research Protection Program, known as HRPP. This initiative was led by Jacqueline Legier. So back in 2018, 5 years ago, Horizon became the first health authority in Canada to obtain accreditation from the Human Research Accreditation Canada. And basically, HRPP is an integrated system through which all new research studies are reviewed by research services, in our case, on the basis of scientific methodology, regulatory compliance, and ethical conduct. The mandate of the HRPP is 5-fold. First is to safeguard and promote the health and welfare of human research participants by ensuring that their rights, safety, and well-being are protected. Second would be to provide guidance and support to the research community in the conduct of research with human participants. Third would be to assist the research community in ensuring compliance with relevant regulations. 4, to provide a timely and high quality review and oversight of human research projects. And finally, to promote a culture of research excellence through a systemic approach that places great value on the conduct of scientifically sound and ethically acceptable human research participants. So with the implementation of the HRPP 5 years ago, that meant that research services became inundated with emails from researchers, and it soon became apparent that we needed a software to help administer research-related activities. So we therefore acquired the Romeo software in 2019, and we customized it for our needs so we could administer all HRPP requests. So we, and I say we, research services, we consider Romeo to be a critical piece of software that has automated the HRPP process by, 1, providing a single portal to which all documents can be submitted for review by both HRPP and the research ethics boards. by creating a centralized repository of all study-related documents that can be reviewed by members of the research team and reviewers of HRPP and RAB. And finally, it helps establish a does establish a communication tool that allows reviewers and researchers to communicate about the status of application reviews through an internal notification system. So, oh, sorry, I'm just going down. So yeah, I put the little cute Romeo. We have no idea why it's called Romeo. It's just, yeah, that's the name of the software in our platform. Another one of our functional, another part of our functional organization is obviously the Regional Research Ethics Boards, and this is run by Tim Christie, who's the Regional Director of Ethics. And as you can appreciate, the mandate of the Ethics Board is to review the ethical accessibility of research involving human participants that is conducted within our institution. The REB board meets on a monthly basis to review full board submissions, and they also do expedited review on a first come, first served basis. Research services, we also have 12 policies and procedures which outline the principles to follow for specific area of research. These include intellectual property, authorship in research, administrative oversight of research studies, to name a few. If you want to have the full list or these policies and procedures, all you need to do is go on Skyline, if you have it, under policies and procedures, and you click on research and you'll see the full list of our 12 policies and procedures. And finally, we wouldn't be able to function and offer the variety of service without research staff, obviously. So there are currently, sorry, I'm going through my notes here. There are currently 20 full-time research services employees and research services, employee. And the next slide is an organizational chart of our research services. So as most of you are aware, Barry Strag is the Regional Director of Research Services, and he reports to Dr. Susan Bream, who's our VP of Medical, Academic, and Research Affairs. So on an organizational level, our roles and responsibilities fall in one of the 5 following categories from left to right. The HRPP, led by Jacqueline Legier, then the SOAR, support and opportunities and assistance for research, which I'll come back in a in a later slide. The MSSU, Maritime Support Service Unit, under administrative and finance, and research support and engagement. And I would say that most research services staff have regional roles, except maybe our research clerks and admin support, so that our physical location is not really a barrier to the support we can provide to Horizon researchers. So for example, even though Stella is physically located in Fredericton, she serves all of Horizon Research as QA manager. Same goes for Katyn. While her office is located in Moncton, she does contracts and budget reviews for all Horizon researchers. So what about our research numbers? Next slide, please. So if we took a snapshot of research activities at a given time during the last year or so, we have about 650 ongoing research studies. About 150 are clinical trials and 500 are applied health research projects. On a monthly basis, there are about 8 to 10 new fully executed clinical trial agreements, and that doesn't count the CDAs and amendments and other types of agreements that Katyn will mention later in her presentation. So that's a lot of research. The next slide shows you an overview of the main research areas conducted at Horizon, and really just the main, because there's a lot more than that. Cardiology does a lot of research to the NB Heart Center in St. John. They do a lot of industry-sponsored clinical trial. The Stan Cassidy Center of Rehabilitation in Fredericton. We have Dr. Colleen O'Connell, who's involved in registries, investigator-initiated studies, as well as industry-sponsored trials. They look at a lot of different, they look at stroke, spinal cord and brain injuries, and neuromuscular disorders such as muscular dystrophy, ALS, and cerebral palsy. The Spine Center in St. John also is involved in a lot of orthopedic registries and clinical databases. That is overseen by Erin Bigney and her group. Oncology, and I should have added hematology. St. John, Moncton, and Fredericton oncologists are involved in numerous industry-sponsored clinical trials, as well as other trials run through the Canadian Cancer Trials Group. We also have research in women's and children's health, and this includes both perinatal and neonatal. The last one run through the Canadian Neonatal Network. So they're involved in registries, and as well as the odd clinical, industry-sponsored clinical trial. We also have social pediatrics in St. John, led by Sarah Gander. They consist of an interprofessional team that is implementing new models of care for children and families in southern New Brunswick. We also have research in neurology. We have two neurologists in St. John, as well as the Mind Clinic in Moncton. Research at the Mind Clinic is overseen by Sylvia Gautreau. And currently, they're working on research registries and clinical databases, which will enable them to study the incidence and prevalence of neurodegenerative diseases in New Brunswick. And last but not least, health and aging. I'm sure you've all heard about Pam Jarrett. Pam is the principal or co-principal investigator for several Healthy Senior Pilot Project grants in New Brunswick, including the New Brunswick NB Palm. And there's also Carol Goodine, who is a hospital pharmacist. And I'd like to mention that Carol was named the Canadian Pharmacist of the Year of 2023 by the Canadian Pharmacists Association for her research on simplifying medication management for patients and helping seniors manage their medication. So while this is not an exhaustive list, it's really essential the main research areas conducted at Horizon. So the remaining 4 slides, I'm just going to go over the types of services we offer. Next slide, please. Excuse me. So we provide support for all steps involving hiring new research staff. So let's say, for example, that the cardiac group obtained a big grant and wanted to hire a research assistant to help with a few research projects. We would be able to assist with this. So we can help with all the administrative tasks, and there are a few involved with posting a position. The most important is writing a solid and precise job description. And this is important because we want to ensure that we attract the candidates which are better suited for the positions. So positions are typically posted 2 weeks internally on Skyline and then 2 weeks externally on Career Beacon. Once the postings are closed, HR then sends us, us, a package which includes all the resumes and cover letters of the candidates. So together with the principal investigator or a manager of a research team, we review the resumes of all the candidates. We contact the candidates that we selected for the interview. For interviews, we conduct the interviews, do reference checks, and then we work with HR once we've selected a candidate. We work with HR to do the letter of offer, criminal check, and make sure that they have access for computer setup and liaise with payroll for direct deposit. I just want to mention that a huge number of research employees that work at Horizon work on a contractual basis. And the process for the hiring contract employees is a little bit different than hiring Horizon employees. And for that purpose, Research Services has developed a template called Research Services Personal Service Contract. And so that's really a legally binding document that mentions all the I guess the work that's to be done and the length and all the liabilities. And in this case, the employer is the principal investigator. The principal investigator is the employer instead of Horizon. Another service we provide is we negotiate clinical trials and confidentiality agreements. Karine Morin here, she will be going into more details about the work she does. So she, as the contract and the budget manager, she reviews and negotiates many types of legal documents. For clinical trials, this includes the confidentiality and the clinical trial agreement, but she does review numerous other types of documents, and a few include like material transfer agreements, data agreements, and memorandum of understanding. But she will go into more detail in how and what she does for this. Next slide, please. At Research Services, we also support the management of research funds. So we have 2 full-time research clerks who oversee all the financial transactions of research funds. I'm sure most of you know Teresa Yeomans in St. John, who's been with us for almost 12 years. And I also like to introduce you to Dami Akinwande, who recently joined our team in Moncton back in April. And really, as the research clerks, they do a lot of things, and they're responsible really for opening and closing research accounts because there's only one account per research study. They prepare and submit invoices for research startup fees. They do reconciliation of all the research transactions. They communicate with sponsors for detailed breakdowns of the research revenues, and internally they communicate with accounts payable and general accounting for processing and transferring research funds. And finally, they also are involved in preparing financial reports on an as-needed basis. Number 4, well, we provide annual workshops like this one on the introduction to clinical trials. Again, for those of you who have been with us for a little while, you are aware that Stella oversees the monthly research quality matters. And you see that there's different types of topics, and usually they're selected, and Stella, correct me if I'm wrong, and I think they're selected on certain requests. If, 3 or 4 people, different people reach out to Stella and they did like a specific topic, so request, and then once a year, Stella distributes surveys to research teams to see what type of topics they would like to have offered in the year to come, and also based on audit findings. We also have an institutional membership to the Network of Networks, N2, so that research staff can access certifications offered through the city program, such as the responsible conduct of research and transportation of dangerous goods. And we are open to provide other education on an as-needed basis, and I think, Stella, you've been offering a lot again on an as-needed basis, training on informed consent. And that could be like a one-on-one training or for a smaller group. Research Services also provides education sessions for investigator-initiated research. The Explore program began in 2019 as education sessions that examine the methodology and analysis used in different types of research. There are roughly, I think, 5 to 8 sessions a year, and they run a year, and they run from September to May. And they cover different topics, including like determining a sample size for your study, developing survey tools, choosing the right statistical analysis for your research project, and how to do, if you want to start doing qualitative or mixed methods. Next slide, please. I'm just going to go quickly over this because of time purposes. We do assist with study design and statistical analysis. So whether you're doing applied health or an investigator-initiated trial, we have dedicated staff who have expertise in study design, methodology, and statistical analysis. We also provide support, assistant with grant submission and scientific writing. And again, we have a few research services staff who can assist with this. And this can be assigned to one or more research of our staff, depending on the topic or the requirements. So in this case, excuse me, while the researcher remains the content expert, we can certainly assist with different sections of the grant, review the budget, and essentially we help to put the whole package together to make sure that the submission meets the requirements of the granting agency and that we get all the signatures obtained. We need. Next slide. I think almost done. So other services we provide, we do have our support opportunities and assistant for research, SOAR program. So Horizon affiliated clinicians or staff can apply to access dedicated resources. The SOAR team consists of a research manager, which is Natasha Hansen, a research methodologist, a research coordinator, and a research assistant. And together they have experience in quantitative and qualitative methods in clinical research conduct. Call for abstracts for these are twice a year, and I believe it's April and October. And finally, we have as part of our team, the Maritime SPORE Support Unit, which supports patient-oriented research under the Canadian Institute for Health Research. So the goal of the MSSU team is to improve the quality, accessibility, and accountability of healthcare by providing evidence for policy and decision-making. And the MSSU team at Horizon consists of Sam Fowler, who's the research manager. They have 2 research coordinators and a research assistant. Next slide, my last one. As part of Horizon's strategic plan, promote a culture of research at Horizon, 3 initiatives have been approved by ELT. So that was a clinical trial support unit, a grant review process, and the clinical trial activation program. So I just wanted to let it hear that the clinical trial support unit will consist of a one-stop shop with detailed steps, instructions, and requirements to conduct an industry-sponsored trials at Horizon. We are aiming for a soft launch of the CTSU in November. It's going to be first on our internet site before we launch it on Horizon external website. And we are working closely with our communications department so we ensure that we effectively promote this new material. That really is it for me. I really want to encourage you to visit our Skyline page where you can find additional information about all the support we offer to our research community. I mean, I really just gave a big snapshot. And if you don't find what you're looking on Skyline, please reach out to us, whether directly to me or my colleagues or at our research services address, which you see here. And if you don't have a quick answer to your question, we typically ask those who have the expertise and knowledge to answer your question, and we'll circle back to you with a reply. I mean, we really are here to help you navigate through your research project. That's our job. So reach out to us. And good luck for the rest of the day.
Thanks, Dominique. Does anybody have any questions before we move on? No questions? I'm just going to put research services team sort of on the spot here. And and REB too. And can I ask Research Services to turn their camera on so that everybody can see us? Because it's kind of nice to put a face to a name. And Teresa, did I see you join us too?
Debbie, I know you're there. Especially
And
since you're
Debbie?
new.
Debbie Lozier, you had signed into. Debbie's REB. All right, everybody's shy. Well, that's okay. I just wanted you to see who we are. I know I've met quite a few of you, and we all have met quite a few of you. But now we're such a virtual environment. It's kind of nice to put a face to a name.
Good idea.
Okay, thanks, guys. I'm going to continue. Let me just minimize here. So what we're going to do is walk through the first couple of steps of the slide today. It is a training day. We're going to talk about what a clinical trial is, what are the clinical trial regulations, how do I submit to the Research Ethics Board or to the HRPP through the Romeo portal, and then the next day, the next session, which is next week, is going to really dive into, now that you have REB approval, how do you get started? So, and how do you maintain that ongoing communication with the Research Ethics Board and with your study sponsor, and how do you work with study monitors and those types of things. So it's really going to try to give you that hands-on, day-to-day operations of what you need to do to do your clinical trials. And I'm going to ask you, maybe Stella, to keep an eye on the chat in case there are questions. So this section should probably take about an hour, and then after that we'll have a 15-minute break, and then people can just get up and move around and stretch a little bit, because this next bit of the presentation is really sort of content and information dense, and for lack of a better term, it's kind of dull because it's GCP, but it's really, really important. It's something I'm really passionate about. So even though it's boring, maybe I'm boring too, I don't know, but we'll walk through it and learn together, and I'll certainly take questions as we go along. So again, just to reiterate, it is a workshop. You will get a certificate of attendance at the end of it, which is great for your training files. And I know Stella has been asking you to provide us with, to indicate what your trainings are, because we are coming up to accreditation review again in January. And part of the accreditation process is that select files will be chosen to make sure that research teams, including investigators and members of your team, have the appropriate training certificates in order to undertake your role, your delegated role and responsibility within the trial. So again, some of this stuff may be really basic for some of you, but it's just important to go back and try to understand some basic terms, basic phases of clinical trials, what our regulations are that we're operating under. So when I go back to you and ask you for something, it's rooted in the fact that I need to see that evidence, because we need to have it on file, because regulations are telling us we need to have it. And then Stephanie's going to go through some Romeo stuff with you, and then talking about what a complete REB application looks like. So why do we need we need training? Well, all the regulations and guidelines tell us that we need to have training. So TCPS2 is the Canadian ethical guidelines that were published by the Panel of Research Ethics way back in the 90s. And they've had a couple of iterations since then, and most recently in 2022. And in every one of these documents, you're going to find a section that says that institutions or investigators or research teams or sites that receive funds or are undertaking clinical research require to have research training before they take on their delegated responsibilities. So Horizon is an institution that has an MOU with the Tri-Agency. The Tri-Agency is Canadian Institute of Health Research, the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, and NSERC. So those three agencies are federal agencies, and they will fund research projects. When they fund your research projects, you have to ensure that you're adhering to the Tri-Council policy statement. There's a core tutorial that's we're asking now all members of research teams to undertake as a basic training, a foundational ethical training, and that can be that's easily accessible on. All you have to do is type in Google TCPS2 core tutorial, and it'll take you there. It'll take you a couple of hours to do it, but it really provides that sort of ethical background. The ethical underpinning and principles in research. Health Canada states as well, so this is law under Division 5, that each individual involved in a clinical trial is qualified by education, training, and experience. So this sort of a day would be able, and the certificate you're going to get is going to give Health Canada that evidence that you do have training in clinical research. The FDA does as well. We do studies that are funded that are under an NDA, or sorry, an IND, which is Investigational New Drug Application through the FDA. They also require that training, that research teams are trained and that there's evidence of that training, and GCP as well. So each individual is involved in research is qualified by education and training. So hopefully this will give you that foundational GCP and clinical trial training, so you can put that certificate in your training file. If anybody asks for you, you can say, yeah, I've had my introductory training to GCP. So what is a clinical trial? I'm not going to read that out, but this is a definition that is in GCP 6R2. I do want to mention that GCP, which is the Good Clinical Practice Guideline, and essentially what that is, GCP is the standard by which all clinical research is to be conducted when the intent is to submit it to regulatory authorities for approval. So if a drug is going to go into clinical research, the intent is to put it on the market, then and it's regulated by either FDA or Health Canada or the EU, the European Union regulatory process, that is conducted in accordance with GCP, or Good Clinical Practice. It's going through its third revision now, so R3, I believe, is still in public consultation, and hopefully is going to be released in, I think it's September 2024. But essentially, the definitions are not going to change, and a clinical trial is an investigation in human subjects intended to discover or verify the clinical, pharmacological, and or pharmacodynamic effects of an investigational product. It's also looking to determine what the adverse reactions are, how a study drug is absorbed, distributed, metabolized, and excreted. That's more for phase 1, but that's essentially the definition of a clinical trial. I know TCPS2 has a different one. GCP focuses specifically on investigational drugs, but of course we know a clinical trial or a clinical investigation can involve even randomization to a surgical intervention, an educational intervention. But with respect to GCP, it's focusing on investigational drugs. And so clinical study and clinical trial, those terms are used interchangeably and they're synonymous. So what are the phases of clinical trials? So a phase 1 clinical trial, the principal objectives are to make sure that a new medication or a new drug presents no major safety issues. So really, if you think about phase 1, what you're focusing on, or what the company is focusing on, is the ADME. So that's the absorption, distribution, metabolism, and excretion. And basically, they want to know is, what does this do to humans? Because it's moving from animal to humans. So we have that data, either it's, whatever they used in the animal model, moving it into humans. So it's first in humans. What does it do when we give it to people? So they get that preliminary evidence that it could offer therapeutic value, or could even prevent disease or certain conditions. So phase 1 studies are 90% of the time given to healthy volunteers in very small numbers. And the reason they're healthy volunteers is because they just want to run it through people and see what it does. So you'll see typically phase 1 clinics are all over the United States. They bring healthy volunteers in, they bring them in for the weekend, they give them these investigational drugs and do all kinds of blood work and urinalysis and all those types of things to see what this stuff is actually doing. And like I said, the numbers are very, very small because you can't, and they're at different titrated doses to see, at what dose does it do something different in the normal system. The only case where it wouldn't be given to healthy volunteers is for oncology research. And of course, that's kind of for obvious reasons that you wouldn't give healthy volunteers chemotherapeutic agents. There was a case back in the 90s. It's pretty popular if you were interested in looking it up, where there was a number of healthy young men in the UK were given this medication that was a monoclonal antibody, and they gave it to 4 people all at the same time, and they all had devastating effects. And so this was a pretty famous trial, and anyway, there was devastating consequences for the participants themselves, but then there was a real sort of a review of the site itself to say, how did this happen? You were only supposed to give one person 1 dose, see what it does. If that seems to be okay, move into the second person. So anyway, these are supposed to be very carefully monitored patients when they're given these medications to make sure that there's no major safety issues. So phase 2, and I just wanted to say we don't do a whole lot of phase 1 studies here. Oncology has done a couple of phase 1 studies. I believe St. John and Moncton have been involved in oncology phase 1 studies, but they're pretty rare. We do more phase 2, but the majority that we do here in Horizon are phase 3 studies. But a phase 2 study is basically, so once you figured out from phase 1 what the stuff does in a healthy person, in phase 2, you want to see what this stuff does in somebody who has a disease under study. So is it going to work in a patient who has a disease that you're actually trying to target? And really so that's efficacy. So you always hear safety and efficacy. So the primary objective really of phase 2 is, does it work? And is it safe? So, and if it works, at what dose does it work? And at what dose, like how high up can we go before we start to see adverse events that are not tolerable? So it's efficacy for the disease or condition under study, and to understand the short-term side effects and risks, and to look more closely at safety and benefits. You'll often see phase 2 studies where they have a number of people assigned to 1 dose arm, and then if they do well, they'll be stopped. There'll be an interim analysis, and then they'll move on to another dose. So there's usually a data safety monitoring board who's looking very closely at these at the information that's provided, and they'll make a recommendation that, yeah, you can safely move up to the next dose. The number of people involved in these phases are usually pretty small. It's around anywhere from 100 to 300, but not like phase 3 where you'll see thousands of people. And that's just specifically because, again, like you can think about rule of minimums. You want to expose the fewest number of people to that medication in order to see the effect that you're desiring. So what do you need? What dose do you need to make a difference? And once that's been established, then it will move on to phase 3. So kind of an interesting point about phase 2 is a lot of clinical trials sort of die at this phase because they weren't either effective, or they had safety issues, or they had intolerable side effects. So if something's not going to work, it's most likely not going to work in phase 2. Phase 3, this is what we see the most of at Horizon. So phase 3, once your phase 2 studies have been completed, we'll move into phase 3, and these are very controlled, but more designed to kind of look at real world type evidence. And there can be thousands of people enrolled in phase 3 studies. So phase 3 is really to confirm that efficacy, to look at the side effects, and also to compare it in combination with standard of care, or other types of combinations of study drugs or treatment. So it's really meant to find out more about safety and efficacy and look at that risk benefit relationship. So phase 3, these are typically multi-center trials, thousands of patients, and this is the phase where if the primary objective is achieved, this data will be submitted to the regulatory authorities in order to determine whether or not either Health Canada or FDA approves it for use. Phase 3 is also the phase where you see if you're a site that's enrolled a high number of patients, chances are if Health Canada wants to do an inspection, they're going to come to the site that has the largest number of patients on, and that just stands to reason. They want to make sure that the study was conducted the way it was supposed to be, because you're contributing a lot of data in order for them to decide whether or not this drug is going to be approved. So it's good to be a high enrolling site, but just the caveat is that you might be under the microscope with Health Canada, because a lot of your data is what's going to help them determine whether or not a study drug is approved or not. So phase 3 trials can take a few years to complete. And you can see why. And like I said, typically these are multi-center. They can be international clinical trials. You can have sites all over the world. And you imagine the challenge from a sponsor perspective, trying to get, thousands of patients on a study where people are adhering to the protocol, because we all operate differently. But I guess that speaks to the power of GCP, is that if you follow the protocol and you follow GCP, then there should be less variation in the way that you conducted it. And so then there's more confidence in that data integrity. And then phase 4. So phase 4 studies are typically post-marketing studies. So once the study has been approved to go on the market, a lot of times regulatory authorities like Health Canada will say they'll issue what's called an NOCC. So an NOC is a notice of compliance. That means it's approved. And the small c means with conditions. So typically what they're looking for in that case is that you gather data in a controlled way on safety and efficacy of the medication. So once it goes out there into the real world, it's being prescribed. Are there any more safety considerations we need to be looking at, or efficacy? And so this is really important to get that kind of longer term data when it's actually out there in the population. So this entire process of going through clinical trials phase, from animal model, first in man, dose selection, efficacy, to more efficacy data in thousands of people, can take up to 20 years or more. And a typical patent on a molecule from the time it's first started is around 20 years. So, and there are not many new molecules or compounds that actually make it through this phase. The number is really, really small. And so now it's becoming even more challenging because we're doing more pharmacogenetic, pharmacodynamics, genetic matching with molecules. So drugs are becoming more specifically targeted to genetic profiles. So I think it's even becoming more of a challenge. And I know we're kind of post COVID-19, but when there was the mRNA vaccines that came out for use with COVID-19 during the pandemic, a lot of people were skeptical. It's like, how did this manage to get to the point where we could give it to humans what appeared to be so quickly, when in actual fact it wasn't quickly. The mRNA vaccine had been in development for over 10 years. And the two scientists that helped to develop it are now recipients of the Nobel Prize, and their story is really interesting. And they talk about even I can't remember the woman's name, unfortunately. She said, I nearly lost my job because I was trying to find a home for this mRNA technology, and we just didn't have it. And then when COVID-19 came in, it was a unique virus. They studied it and went, you know what? If we tweak this mRNA a little bit, we're going to be able to match it to this virus, and hopefully it'll work. So when COVID-19 vaccines first started, when we first started giving them to people, it was under probably the biggest clinical trial there ever was, because it was used under an emergency use authorization. So meaning it wasn't approved, but it was approved for that indication, provided that all the data was collected around its safety and efficacy. So that's just kind of maybe an interesting story, or maybe not. But just on the phases of clinical trials and how long it can take to actually get something to market. Some of the clinical trial designs, I just wanted to give you a couple of them, but those of you that have gotten clinical trial protocols will see that one of the most common one that's used is the parallel group design. So these are for confirmatory trials in which patients are randomized to one or two or more arms, and each arm is allocated to a different treatment. So these treatments will include the investigational product at one or more doses and at one or more control arms, and will may have a placebo or an active comparator. So that's typically the most common one that we see. Crossover design is maybe less common here than the parallel, but each participant is randomized to a treatment, and then they act as their own control, because they're crossed over and subjected to the other treatment arm. So, and these periods of before they cross over is often separated by a washout period. Some of the other new trials designs that I just wanted to mention, because the GCP, the Health Canada, all these folks are trying to figure out how to apply the regulatory requirements, and those are adaptive trials. So an adaptive trial is really like a real world evidence type study where you have to adapt based on the data that you're receiving. So you have to do a data analysis almost in real time when you're subjecting people to different investigational products or different treatment arms, and then pivot or adapt to whatever data you're getting and move on to maybe something different. So you can see that a protocol would have more of an open design. So how, Health Canada is like, well, how do we manage that with respect to amendments? Like, do we still subject them to, the full review with a no objection letter? So, but they are under consideration now to see if there's any kind of changes that is going to be required to the regulatory requirements with respect to adaptive and platform trials. Platform is another one. It's basically an open protocol, and as evidence comes in as to the therapeutic benefits of one treatment arm, and they may have to switch and try new treatment arms. And so during COVID, I think the best example of an adaptive was it was remap cap or something. So they started, so as like we were trying to figure out, does dexamethasone work in ARDS, or acute respiratory distress syndrome? So they had, people were getting convalescent serum, they were getting dexamethasone, there was 3 or 4 different treatment arms, and then they would drop a treatment arm as remdesivir was another one, an antiviral. So, it's important to be able to make changes quickly based on the information that you're provided. But, it is a challenge for the regulatory scheme that we operate under as to how do we capture that And how do we get appropriate approvals for that? Any questions so far before we move into the guidelines? I can't see any chats or anything, so you guys will let me know. So the Canadian regulations and guidelines that we work under, so it's Health Canada under the Food and Drug Regulations, Division 5, Part C, that's for investigational drugs. If we're doing a clinical trial with the Natural Health Products Regulations, we're operating under Part 4. And if we're doing a clinical trial with a medical device, an investigational medical device, then that's the Medical Device Regulations Part 3, specifically Section 83 in the Medical Device Regulations. So depending on what kind of a clinical trial you're doing, you're going to have to operate under one of these 3 sections. So this is law, and these are guidelines. So the Tri-Council policy statement, as I mentioned, is the joint statement put out by the 3 funding agencies. And these are the ethical guidelines for conduct of research in humans. And it was most recently updated in 2022. But as I mentioned earlier, Horizon is an institution eligible to receive funding. So we must comply with TCPS2, both in how research ethics oversight is conducted and how the study itself is conducted. Then there's international regulations and guidelines. So as I mentioned, GCP, Good Clinical Practice E6, was first established in the 90s. And that was in response to, there was no generalized standard before that for different countries to accept clinical trial data from other countries to submit to their regulatory authorities for approval. And so the international conference convened and said, okay, if we develop a standard by which everybody who's doing this clinical trial must abide by, then we will accept the data from other countries to our regulatory authorities for approval. So that's sort of how GCP came to be. The Declaration of Helsinki, that those are the guidelines established by the World Medical Association, and these are the ethical principles for physicians engaged in the conduct of clinical research. And so GCP has incorporated or adopted those ethical principles from Helsinki. So basically, GCP is the international standard for clinical trials involving drugs, whether generating clinical trial data intended for submission to regulatory authorities. So Division 5 and natural health products must be conducted in accordance with GCP. Investigational new drugs, they have their own standard by which the research must be conducted, and that's the ISO standard, ISO 14155. But there are GCP principles incorporated within the ISO standard, but just to be aware that if you're doing an investigational clinical trial with devices under an ITA, that the requirement is to follow Health Canada's Part 3, Section 83, and the ISO standard 14155. So with respect to GCP, there are 13 principles. There are the ethical principles. It talks about risks and benefits, and that the rights and safety of research participants are subjects of the most and utmost importance, that the drug information supports the trial. So this is the background information. This is why we ask you to submit an investigator's brochure. So that's sort of the information to date, and does it support the use of the drug in this particular clinical trial in this particular population. The trial has to be scientifically sound, and that is your protocol. Health Canada, as part of issuing their no objection letter, does look at methodology, which is why when it comes to HRPP, we don't focus as much on methodology, because in order for you to get a no objection letter, Health Canada looks at it through that lens. That your protocol is RAB approved, so that you must submit it to a research ethics board. that medical care is provided under the direction of a qualified physician or a dentist as well, is according to Health Canada regulations. They're allowing a dentist, and they're also looking at now other clinicians who could be principal investigators, like nurse practitioners and even pharmacists, because pharmacists can prescribe now, and we know that nurse practitioners can prescribe. So the regulations may be opened up to those professionals. That we have qualified individuals conducting trials, again, qualified through education and training. That there is free and informed consent. That's why it's important to have a standard operating procedure around how you conduct informed consent. That there is data accuracy. So this is when they're looking at validation of systems that's used to capture data. And why monitors come to do source data verification. They'll look at the patient's medical record, look at the information that's been submitted in the ECRF, and to make sure that it's accurate, that confidentiality of research participants is protected, and that the medications or the investigational products are manufactured in accordance with good manufacturing practices, and that they're administered in accordance with the protocol, and that there's quality assurance built in throughout the entire conduct of the trial. And that quality assurance is what you'll see. We've had a few Health Canada inspections, and there have been observations to say that systems and procedures were not in place to ensure quality of every aspect of the trial. And specifically what they're talking about, like clinical engineering maybe didn't do a calibration of a piece of equipment that was used to generate clinical trial data. So really, standard operating procedures are going to address Principle 13. So if you have an SOP for everything that you do, for how you calibrate the equipment that's used in clinical trials that the sponsor has identified to you as critical equipment, how you do your informed consent, how you communicate with the RAB, those types of things. So that quality is really controlled or helped to be controlled through the development of good standard operating procedures. The US FDA. So the FDA, we do studies where they're being conducted under FDA oversight because they're submitted as an IND or an investigational new drug application. So the FDA has the Code of Federal Regulations, is what they call it. They use GCP as well, but their set of rules or guidelines for clinical trial conduct is really under the Code of Federal Regulations. And so they operate under, it's, Title 21 in the different sections. 11, Part 11 is electronic records. So that addresses the requirements if you're using electronic records, what you need to consider. 50 is ethical conduct. 56 is your research ethics board. 312 is it escapes me, but it's conduct of under an IND. And then section 45 CFR 46 is the Office of Human Research Protections. And so basically they've combined all these things. And when you hear the common rule is that there is synergy between CFR 21 and CFR 45 so that none of them contradict. And it all depends on where you get your money from, which ones you have to adhere to. So if it's an FDA regulated study, it's Title 21. If your study is funded through OHRP or the Department of Health and Human Services or the NIH, it's 45 that you need to adhere to. And so a lot of our studies, our oncology studies, through the CCTG or the Canadian Clinical Trials Group, gets money from NIH. So therefore, we're obligated to be in compliance with 45 CFR 46. So there's a lot of things, you need to consider when you're looking at the regulatory requirements to make sure that we are in compliance and in adherence with all of these regulatory requirements. So we need to comply with Title 21 if we are registered with the FDA on an IND. So if they've listed your site, a Canadian site, on the IND, then you're going to be asked to sign a 1572. And a 1572 is a statement of the investigator. Some Canadian sites won't allow their centers to sign 1572s because it's asking the investigator to sign off that, you know, the REB does what it's supposed to do, and those different types of things. We're less concerned about it because basically it's really a mechanism for drug to come across the border. So, and we've never got in trouble, although now that I've said it, knock on wood, that we've had anybody sign 1572s. What I would suggest, though, is if you're signing a 1572, to ask the sponsor to give you a waiver of Part 56. And Part 56 is the REB requirements, because basically your investigator is saying that the REB is going to do what it's supposed to do. And so that's the one, like, it's almost like a vendor. So the FDA sees REB review as almost like selecting a vendor to do your research ethics oversight. I wouldn't sign off on behalf to say the REB is doing what it's supposed to do. Although now I would be less concerned because we do have accreditation, and all of our REB SOPs and operations conform with every single one of these requirements. So I would be less concerned. At the first, before you're even included on an IND, you can request to be included as a non-US site. But sponsors are really not willing to do this because it's a lot of extra paperwork for them. If they can just get you to sign a 1572 and submit it, it's easier for them. But you know, if they can include you as a non-US site, then it's a lot easier. It can be a lot easier for us. And then you're obligated to comply with, you can look at FDA 312 section 120, talks about non-US sites. So the foreign study conducted under an IND. So you still have to comply with all the relevant FDA regulations as if it was being conducted in the United States. But the sponsor is not required to conduct a foreign study under an IND in order for it to use it as support for a new drug application or an investigation on a new drug. The FDA's got helpful guidance there, so you can just look it up if you have any concern. We've never had any concern signing a 1572. I just wanted to give you the information so that you have it, and that you're familiar with, you know, what the requirements are around it. So those are the regulations and the guidelines. I just wanted to talk a little bit around the ethical requirements, and where all of this stuff is kind of stemmed from before we move into to the next section. Any questions or anything so far on Health Canada or TCPS2, FDA, OHRP? Stella, is everybody still awake? So the Nuremberg Code was, of course, was in response to the atrocities of World War II and under Nazi Germany. And so despite it being issued in 1947, many unethical studies, they continued. And this was not intended to be just, you know, a European code. It was meant to be international, and that anybody doing clinical research would adhere to the Nuremberg Code. But we know that that's not the case, because studies such as Tuskegee, which was the syphilis trial in the United States, they violated the fundamental principles set forth in Nuremberg Code. And there's other examples too. I mean, all you would have to look up is, atrocities in clinical research studies, and you'll find many, many examples of studies that were conducted without adhering to proper ethical principles. But in 1947, after the tribunal, the Nuremberg Code was issued, and it indicated that there were 10 standards that physicians must conform to when they carry out experiments on humans. And first and foremost was that participants must provide voluntary informed consent to their participation in the research study. And we know that obviously this was not what happened in World War II, because there were many prisoners of war who were subjected to terrible experimentation, and mostly for the benefit of, they were trying to figure out and get information for their soldiers, for their German soldiers. So they did things like, what temperatures how cold of a temperature can a human body withstand? And because they wanted to know how long could they keep their German soldiers out in the field in the wintertime, and that they would still be able to function. So those types of things, just horrific things. And the other is that research must be necessary and based on prior animal experimentation. So we know that a lot of these things that they conducted were not necessary. The risk has to be proportionate to importance. That there's no unnecessary physical or mental suffering, that there's freedom to withdraw from participation at any time. Oops, sorry. But the most important thing I think that should take away from the Nuremberg Code is that there is informed consent and that participation in research is voluntary. And as I mentioned, there were still other things after that was issued that didn't follow that ethical principle. I talked about this earlier. The World Medical Association in 1964 issued this document for the guidelines for conduct of research by physicians on patients. So medical progress based on research, this was the principle that it's, and we see this now, and it's still relevant. So medical progress is based on research, that it improves treatments and understanding of diseases, but it also involves risks and burdens. So therefore, it must be subjected to ethical standards. So it requires that there's a sound protocol, and you'll see within every one of your clinical trial protocols, the sponsor is going to write that this protocol is being conducted in accordance with the Declaration of Helsinki. It's in every single one of your protocols. That there's independent research ethics board review, and that the ethics board must maintain oversight and give continuing approval. That the well-being of participants overrides the interests of science and society. That there's voluntary and informed participation, that their privacy and confidentiality is protected, that there are certain requirements for informed consent, and that there are publication requirements. So the Helsinki has been updated quite a few times, but it's a brief and interesting document if you wanted to take a look at it. Other compliance requirements. So we have the privacy legislation in New Brunswick. And so this is the part that I look at under the HRPP. And so, as you know, when a research study is submitted, it comes into ORS first for a compliance review, which includes a privacy review. So what I'm looking for when it comes in with respect to regulatory compliance is there a no objection letter that's attached to that protocol? And that means that Health Canada has signed off on it. You don't have to have your no objection letter at the time you submit if it's still being reviewed, but it has to be received by the Research Ethics Board, a no objection letter, really before a final approval letter is issued. And that's a sponsor responsibility, is to make sure they're communicating with Health Canada and getting those documents to you. The other part is the privacy requirements. So I'm looking at the informed consent document specifically under the privacy and confidentiality section to make sure that it is consistent with the privacy legislation. There is a section in the privacy legislation that talks specifically about research. And so what it states is that an approval under this section 43 is conditional on the person proposing the research project entering into an agreement with the custodian in accordance with the regulations. So every clinical trial agreement that you have has a section on confidentiality in it where it mentions applicable privacy legislation. So this trial will be conducted in accordance with applicable privacy legislation. There's an understanding that personal health information won't be published in a format that could reasonably be expected to identify the individuals. That the personal health information that is requested is consistent with what's required with the approved research project. And that the research project complies with the required safeguards for protecting the information. More on FIPPA, because this is the legislation that we're operating under. So clinical trial agreements include, as I just mentioned, clauses where applicable privacy legislation will be addressed. Consent form need to be explicit on who has access to the personal health information, what is being collected, where it's going, and for how long it's stored. So the privacy legislation is based on the Canadian Standards Association 10 privacy principles. And so one of the most important ones is explicit informed consent. So people need to consent to collection, use, storage, disclosure of their personal health information. Only de-identified personal health information is permitted to be disclosed outside of the institution. So what is considered really truly de-identified? I've done hour-long topics or education sessions on de-identification. It's really can be quite complex. Be careful of screening activities where PHI is being accessed for eligibility before consent is signed. So I've made a note there that generally this is not permitted, but there are some rare exceptions. So if you don't have approval to access personal health, REB approval to access personal health information for screening purposes, you cannot access it for screening purposes. And so it's really up to the REB whether or not they're going to permit that screening activity. And they're going to ask you to justify it against TCPS 2, which is access to the information is important to the research, that safeguards will be in place. There are criteria that's to be used that they use in order to determine whether or not access to information, personal health information, or that intrusion into somebody's personal health record is necessary or justified based on the requirements of the research study. Just to be careful when sponsors request scanned copies. I don't know how relevant that still is in this digital world that we have, but just to be cautious to redact identifiers. And remember that identification on like medical records of who the primary care provider is. So if there's a physician listed, that's considered an identifier according to the Act. So that all that stuff needs to be redacted. Use a study code. Again, just be cautious of where it's being sent. Check and recheck that the intended recipient is actually the intended recipient. Always follow the least principal rule. So rule of minimums. Only collect the information that you need in order to do the research study. Horizon has policies on privacy that must be adhered to. So not only do we have the provincial legislation, we also have the Horizon privacy policies that you need to follow as well. And they're pretty strict. And we have had privacy breaches in research. We've had some doozies, and we've had some not, but still breaches of privacy according to what breach definition is. And it can happen. We're all human. But, just to do that second check, if you're sending something somewhere that's meant to be redacted, maybe even have a second pair of eyes on it before it goes somewhere. If you're emailing somebody, make sure the email recipient is who it's intended to be. Don't put information in a subject line of an email. Contain it within the body of the email. Those types of tips are really helpful to prevent a privacy breach. Again, you can consult with us. I do have privacy certification. I work really closely with the Chief Privacy Officer. If you have any questions that are research privacy related, feel free to ask. And then researchers who collect personal health information, you are considered a custodian under the Act. So a lot of people don't know that. They think that, you're maybe an agent acting on behalf of the institution, but a researcher who collects personal health information is listed in the privacy legislation as a custodian. So there's, a lot of responsibility that's associated with being a custodian of personal health information. So just a summary of the compliance requirements and why I'm, losing my mind half the time trying to figure out what applies where. But, first and foremost, it's GCP R2. So these are the International Ethical and Scientific Quality Standards for Clinical Trials. Health Canada has officially adopted GCP, so it's law. So E6 GCP applies to clinical trials, phases 1 through 4. So I know that phase 4 might be a bit of a surprise because Health Canada doesn't regulate phase 4. You only need to do a clinical trial application for phases 1 through 3, but they can inspect a phase 4 study, and the expectation would be that you would be adherent with GCP. Health Canada, phase 1 through 3, as I mentioned, phase 4 is exempt from the regulations, but there is an expectation of GCP adherence. So Health Canada has issued a guidance document. It's called Guide 100. It's really helpful. It gives you, what the regulation is, and then the application, what that looks like. The Tri-Council policy statement. So this is, I would say, the equivalent of the Belmont Report in the U.S., or which has, OHRP has adopted those ethical principles. So that's OHRP is American, PRE, or the Panel of Research Ethics, is Canadian, but they're the ethical guidelines. And so it's really important to remember that primarily the ethical guidelines, everything that we do actually stems from respect for persons, beneficence, non-maleficence, and justice. So just about every section in GCP is going to speak to one of those principles. And of course, the FDA. So Health Canada, I'm just keeping an eye on the time here because we're going to take a break when I'm finished. So Health Canada regulations, Part C, Division 5, came into effect in 2001 and applicable to all clinical trials involving new investigational drugs or marketed drugs. So if it's already on the market and you want to see if it does something else in another indication that's not approved for, that requires a clinical trial application. And it has adopted the ICH GCP E6 standard. The focus is on the sponsor. And so if you're selected for an inspection by Health Canada, the sponsor is going to get notified first, and then the principal investigator. So the sponsor is going to have to work with Health Canada to resolve any observations because they are the one, right, on the no objection letter. That's why the focus is on the sponsor. They are the applicant to Health Canada for a clinical trial application. Therefore, the conduct is their responsibility. So a CTA, clinical trial application submitted to Health Canada. They have a 30-day review period, at which time a no objection letter is issued. You've all seen no objection letters if you've done clinical trials. They are to be submitted with your application if you have it, or to indicate at the time of application that it's pending. But it does need to be received before you can actually green light to go ahead with either your study or an amendment. The natural health products, I don't think we've done one of these, to be honest. I'm pretty sure we haven't, but the regulations came into effect in 2004. And again, it's using a natural health product where the intent is to discover or verify the effects on NHPs in humans. Again, focuses on the sponsor, and the expectation would be to follow GCP. And the medical device regulations, we do a few of these. So these regulations came into effect in 1998, and they are applicable to medical devices sold or imported for investigational testing. The focus is on the manufacturer's obligations to obtain an authorization from Health Canada. They are making some changes to the regulations, and they are implementing or instituting an inspection program. And so if you're subject to an inspection under Part 3, Section 83, you will be required to comply with Section 83 and ISO 14155, which is the International Standards Organization on standards for doing clinical research with devices, with medical devices. So as part of operating under a CTA, or you've got a no objection letter, you are required to comply with GCP. The sponsor is required to submit and get approval of the initial protocol and any amendment revisions. How they define amendments is in Division 5. You can look at it, but essentially, if there's a substantive change to the way that your study's conducted, then that's got to be submitted to Health Canada. We had an observation once where from Health Canada inspection, the sponsor did not submit. They were sending out sort of guidance clarification documents to investigative sites. And so the Health Canada inspectorate said, this is a big enough change that it should have been submitted as an amendment to the protocol, not letters of guidance or guidance clarification to the site. So the sponsor had an observation with respect to that. That the drugs are labeled specifically for the trial. They've got a number of requirements for clinical trial drug labeling. That there's a signature on the QIU, or the Qualified Investigator's Undertaking Form, which indicates agreement to perform the trial in accordance with GCP. That there is notification by the sponsor to Health Canada of premature discontinuation of the trial. That you need to report, sponsor needs to report serious adverse reactions within a specified time frame. And that Health Canada may inspect or audit sponsors and or sites. And I know now that they're doing quality audits too, Health Canada is. So what that specifically looks like, I'm not really sure, because it's kind of new for them, but I think they go in and make sure that sites have SOPs, have training and all those types of things before a trial is started. There's record and data retention requirements, which now they're only being required to be kept for 15 years, down from 25, which is new. But there's a lot of things that you can see that if you're doing a clinical trial that you need to be compliant with, and it can be quite daunting, but if you have a good set of standard operating procedures, if you have good training and education, you should be fine. There shouldn't be any concerns. And you have us to help you out too if Health Canada ever comes knocking on your door. So the ethical requirements, protocols, and any changes to protocols, including informed consent, must be approved by the RIB before they're implemented. There is a caveat. If you need to implement an amendment in order to, for the safety of your research participants, you can do it right away, but there still needs to be notification of the sponsor and the Research Ethics Board. There's requirements for RIB composition. They are defined in the regulations. It requires that the RIB must sign an attestation that the REB agrees to follow Health Canada regulations. We have our REBA is a Research Ethics Board attestation. We have a section now in all your final approval letters that makes that attestation, so there's no need to have REBAs signed anymore. So that statement is there. You don't need to include the REBA statement with your package. Any REB refusals to approve a protocol or changes must be reported to Health Canada. That's our sponsor requirement. And I again would refer you to Guide 100 because it's really, really helpful in establishing the requirements for working under a CTA. Stephanie's going to get into this a little bit more in the next section, but when you're preparing for your REB submission, so identify early on who your team members are. And so we know a team is a sponsor. We know it's the investigator, the coordinator, the research team. We know there's a submission to the REB that's required, and we know that impacted departments need to agree to support the trial. And who I mean by that is, can pharmacy do it? Do they have the right equipment? Does diagnostic imaging have the right imaging equipment that's required for the study? Can the lab accommodate it? So have conversations, the earlier the better, with your impacted departments to say, we're thinking about doing this study. We're most likely going to be selected. Can you do it? And there will be a bit of a change as part of the CTSU that we'll talk about later because we're not really ready to go there yet. But just to help you facilitate those conversations with your impacted departments. Make sure you have your training. TCPS2 is required, the core tutorial. Do your GCP training. Those are available through City. It's not going to cost you anything. We have, Horizon has an institutional membership with N2. You can go in and do GCP training at your leisure through the City program and Health Canada as well. Health Canada is going to look at these things when they come. They want to see your training files. You have to have them and you have to be up to date with your training, or it'll be an observation. That includes all your co-investigators. They all have to do it too. And man, like trying to chase some of these guys down to do their training, it's a bit of a challenge. So earlier, the better. Initial full board REB approval. So Stephanie's going to talk about this, is just to submit all the required information and documents to the REB. That really facilitates your review process. And within the Romeo system, there's a list of everything that's required. So complete submissions are good facilitated submissions. What are your responsibilities as your team? So the sponsor, they need to initiate, they need to management the trial conduct, they need to pay for it. So it's their responsibility to pay for it. And Corinne's going to talk about budgeting because they need to pay us for the cost of doing their trial. The principal investigator, king or queen, they own everything. So they need to make sure that there's proper conduct of all aspects of the trial. They need to be qualified through education and training. They need to be able to provide medical care in the province that they're licensed. That's the requirement. They need to comply with GCP and all the relevant regulatory requirements. They need to allow monitoring and supervise qualified staff to whom responsibilities have been delegated. If you read a clinical trial agreement, all those things are in there. Because even though the sponsor is responsible to Health Canada, they delegate a lot of these things to the principal investigator and the site. And the way that they delegate it is legally through a clinical trial agreement. So your coordinators, whatever your role is, to submit to REB, to maintain the regulatory documents, communication with REB, to do informed consent, to screen, to recruit, to implement the protocol, meaning scheduling visits and visit conduct themselves, to do data collection and entry, records management, communication with the sponsor. All this stuff is captured on a delegation log. So that's why the delegation log is you identify which members of your team have which responsibilities, get them trained to do those delegated responsibilities. Once they're trained, then they can undertake those responsibilities and the PI can sign off and say, yep, they're doing this. They've been trained to do it. REB's role as part of the HRPP is to look at the research study through that ethical lens and their first and foremost mandate is to protect the rights and safety and well-being of research participants. They also look at qualifications of the principal investigator, and they determine whether or not the protocol meets the relevant ethical requirements in order to proceed. And then the HRPP, we try to help you ensure that your training is current. Methodology is sound, I have that there, but as I mentioned earlier, if you get a no objection letter, we don't dive into it any further than that. And we also help to make sure that your regulatory requirements are met. Impacted departments, like I said, early. The earlier you can talk to them, the better. Because pharmacy might have to do additional training. There is a process for them to receive investigational product and to store it and dispense it and destroy it. So they need time to prepare for a new clinical trial. Laboratories the same way. If you don't do your own labs, they need to prepare their standard operating procedure for how the drugs relate or the bloods related to these studies are going to be stored and shipped, where they're going to go. And of course, sponsors look for accreditation certificates and lab values and all those types of things. And these guys need to be GCP trained too, depending on their level of involvement in the study. And diagnostic imaging, same thing. So how are you going to do your images? Are they going to be uploaded, de-identified? What's the process for that? They need to be involved early to make sure that you guys don't have any impediments to starting your study. Because once the sponsor gives you the green light, that means that you're ready to start putting patients on study. These are some of my references that I used. And if there's any questions at all, I'm happy to take them now. I know it's pretty dense material, as I mentioned, but any questions before we take a bit of a break? Comments? Anything at all? Yes, you will get a copy of the slides for sure. Okay. If there's no questions, why don't we take 15 minutes? So it's 11:08, I guess. Come back at 11:25, and then we'll get started with Stephanie's section. Make sure you get up and move around. Go get a coffee. Okay, we'll see you in 15 minutes. I think most people are back. We'll just give it another minute. Did everybody get a coffee? I did. Did you get a coffee, Dominic?
I like to heat up my coffee. I make one batch in the morning and then I just heat it up during the day. What about you?
Brand new.
Nope,
Is
even better.
just curious, is everybody like, can you guys turn on the microphone, like except the presenters? It's so strange.
No, you
Something
can.
about
You have muted everyone and the
I
video as
have
well.
muted everybody.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that's awful.
They
I'm
cannot
so
do
sorry,
that.
guys. I don't know what I did.
It's at the beginning, the setting.
Yeah, I'm trying to go back and fix it, but I just don't know.
Oh, is that why Teresa and Dami couldn't?
Yeah, they could
It's
not
okay.
turn on the camera. I must have done something crazy
It's okay. We can
that
present them
caused
later
people
on.
to be silent. I'm so sorry, guys. I'm
Don't worry about it.
Don't worry.
It's okay. We can. and we
having
can
some crazy day. I'm so sorry.
It's Friday.
Don't worry.
More actions.
Still, I've changed that. If somebody try to open
How do you
their
change it? Do you know how to do it?
yes. I went to settings
Uh-huh.
and then meeting options. And then you go down and you allow reactions and
God.
allow.
microphone. Oh boy. Okay,
So
there
you
you
have
go.
to. Yeah, maybe you
I
save
think
it.
allowed everything and then I save
There.
it.
There you go.
Oh, I'm
Okay.
so sorry, everybody. I didn't know what I did. Thanks for letting me know. Now you can talk. Everybody's can turn on the camera. Good to see you, Debbie. My apologies,
Yeah.
really.
No worries. We're back.
We're back.
Great
Okay.
presentation, Jackie.
Oh, thank you.
Really good.
Good. I'm glad you liked it. I'm
Sorry,
glad you're
we
here.
weren't-
Dan.
We weren't able to give you much feedback, but it was very good.
Oh, thank you. And well, now that we have you guys here, is Teresa? Teresa, do you have a camera? Is Teresa here? She might
Oh,
not
I
have.
can see Dami.
Yeah, there's
Big
Dami.
smile and wave, Dami. There's our
Good to
new
see you,
research
Dami.
clerk in Moncton.
How are you?
No. Teresa must have had to step off. That's okay. But yeah, so I just wanted to, I think everybody's back. And just before we get started, because we didn't have an opportunity to see Dami or Debbie. So Debbie Loisy is with the Research Ethics Board, and I'm sure you've gotten tons of letters and notifications from Romeo from Debbie. So there's Debbie. Want to give a wave? Thanks, Debbie. It's always nice to see members of the Research Ethics Board. And Dami's with research services based in Moncton with a financial responsibility. So, hi, Dami.
Hi.
Hi, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, just nice to put a face
Yeah.
to name. So, with that, I think we can get started again. So, I hope everybody had a nice break. And I am actually going to mute myself and hand it over to Stephanie.
Yeah, Jacqueline, I'm gonna share my screen if you don't mind. I like to change my own slides.
All right, I'll stop sharing.
Okay, thank you.
There you go.
So do you see my screen?
We do.
Yes.
So my screen a little bit deported, so I might not look at you directly, but that's okay. I'm there. So I want to present myself. So I'm Stephanie Capulet. I'm located in Moncton. I've started my position as HRPP manager in May 23, working closely with Jacqueline. And one part of my job is to take care of Romeo. So you can call me the monster's bride. Don't do that. So there you go. So congratulations, you've landed on the study approval part. So as you know, and as Jacqueline said, we have two parts, the HRPP parts and the REB parts. The HRPP allows to flag and address methodological and regulatory concerns. Research project, tight follow-ups with research project. And so what mainly Stella will do then after that, like after study approval and when the study has started, she will do internal audit and inspection reports. That way we can bring you tailored education program like we're doing now. So a poll question. Stella, can you bring the poll question, please? It's about Romeo, and I would like to know who has been using Romeo mainly. Stella is gone. Well, that's okay. Let's say you never use Romeo, or you use it and and it brought you a lot of questions.
Stephanie, did you want to do the
Yeah.
poll question? I'm sorry, I just missed it.
That's okay. That's okay.
You're
You can
okay?
do it if not, or we
Yeah,
can not do
sorry
it.
guys. Yeah, I have poll questions, two poll questions that Stephanie wanted to ask. I'm gonna launch one. The first question is, have you ever used Romeo? Simple yes or no question. I'll answer mine. Wow, I see 94% of you said yes, and 90%, and 10% of you have not used it.
Congratulations.
Yeah, I know. Lucky you so far, but life is about to get changed. Next question. If you have used Romeo, what were the main issues you encountered? If you can just kind of briefly type it in. Need training, confusing. Registration. Notification was difficult to navigate. It freezes. I didn't know that.
Well, sometimes you're in the system and then it puts you out.
Navigation is not clear. I think that's what it meant. Navigation, notification, registration. Okay.
So
Thanks yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Stella.
I'll let you go ahead.
Yeah, what we can do and what we could do in the future, if there's so much difficulties with Romeo, I could do a training session for whoever wants to attend. I think it's going to be helpful. Yeah, and Romeo is.
You muted yourself, Stephanie.
Once again. Are you okay if we move out of the poll and I continue the presentation? Okay, so yeah, that's mainly what I put that sign. I don't think I want to go in there, but you still have to do, right? So as everybody knows, yes, as everybody knows, Romeo is the ethics submission portal. Well, the HRPP and ethics submission portal. It supports you throughout your project, although it doesn't seem like it supports you, it does. From submitting and modifying your application to renewing and closing your study. So application can be submitted anytime, and it's a web-based system, accessible anywhere. Like you just have to click there and you'll go to Romeo. So Romeo, again, you have to register here. You go there like with the previous link I've put it. Register, create your account, and then happiness starts. When you go there, it's just a lot of fun. So anyway, let's say you want to start to apply for a new study. You go, you create your register, your login, you choose your role, either if you're a principal investigator or a project team member, and you apply new. Sorry, I went too fast. You apply new. Then you have two types of submission because we share the database with Vitalité. Don't do any mistakes unless you want to submit to Vitalité, you go to HHN. So it's mainly here. Then, okay. Then it opens a new project and you fill all the tabs. I won't go through all the tabs because there's a lot to do. But in the next session, as I said, if we want to do that, I will be very happy to have a group and go through each steps. I didn't want to give you too much today because I understand you have a lot. And if you want a specific training, we will do that. So when you've entered all the information, added all the attachments, then you have to submit. It's the PI who has to submit. So the PI might have to enter into the system and submit it he or her their self. So Romeo, it's a poem, but it ensures HRPP to review, ensuring your research meet all the requirements for methodology, regulatory, compliance, and privacy, and ethical conduct. Once the HRPP group has reviewed the project, it is sent to REB. And then you will have either conditional, final, or which I don't, the one that I don't want for you, it should be rejected, and it's very, very rare. When you get, after conditional approval, you will get a final approval, and then you will be granted, like as I said, of approval, and you will get a letter from the REB. And then you can start your project. So Romeo, what I want you to understand, it's a database to submit, but it also permits us to analyze what's happening in the health authority on the research field. And so we can use the data that are entered in Romeo to have a nice screenshot of what is happening and what we can do better. What we get also from Romeo, it's metrics. So I'm showing now the metrics that I'm able to get out of the system. And what I've done for today is take all the clinical trials, and mainly it's a 25% of each new studies. We divide that in quartile, so every 3 months, and it's a median of 25%, which is very interesting, and we're looking to increase that if we can, and also if you can as well. So this slide shows you the amount of information and requests that are done through the Romeo system to the REB. I will not describe everything, but it's just to tell you it's 1,650 for last fiscal year. And the global turnaround time to complete and to get approval with the REB, HRPP REB, it's 3 to 5 weeks. So this data I'm able to get them from Romeo, but Romeo is only better if everything is filled correctly. So that's why it's really important for all of us to enter information correctly. And that's my next slide. So we want to have for you a good submission. The good submission will bring you to have approval faster. So don't forget file attachments. Of course, protocol, ICF, brochure, letter of NOL letters, letter of supports, variable list, interview guides, advertisement, anything that the patient will see. Also contracts, CVs of PIs, their medical licenses, and although we don't ask for the study team to have your TCP/S2 GCP record of training added into the system. Don't forget to have them. For the submission to HRPP, we need you to cover all the details for the study. Method details, randomization, descriptions of scale, time frame of study, inclusion criteria, data storage, how you're going to handle the information. Everything is really, really important for us to get, otherwise it's going to slow down the approval. And then, of course, you have to fill the tabs correctly, otherwise it's going to slow down. What I've told you here, all the stuff that I've told you, we were able to get that information because it was events that happened in Romeo and that we were able to get from the system. So all these have happened. People missing files, people missing CVs, not all the information were put into the system. That slowed down the project approval. But if everything is perfectly done, or at least on the best way, then you will get approved. And your project will be able to move forward and to start for recruitment. Projects are approved, but as an HRPP institution, we are approved as well. We are approved by the Human Research Accreditation Canada, HRA Canada. And as it was said before, we are accredited since 2020, and we have to renew this accreditation. So we went through a whole process and got an accreditation renewal this year in September 23. So for us, it's a lot of work working on showing that we are able to follow all the standards of conduct, and we have all the SOP that are available for you to use to be able to have your project done in the best way to protect the participants. So we are subjected to annual review and improvement. And the next phase of accreditation is going to include the requirement for HRA Canada with the conduct of human research. So we are accredited, and we are still on an improvement process. Also, what I wanted to tell you, so we create these SOP, but we don't keep them for us. It's not because we like to write stuff. These SOP are available to you on Skyline, and we have all HRPP SOPs and the national standards as well that you can find on the research services page. You're lost in Romeo? No problems. Previously, videos have been made for you to use to be able to start with your submission process. And you have all the links here. But as I said before, if there's a need for education on Romeo, I will be very happy to offer it to you. And I'm done. Do you have any questions?
Any questions for Stephanie?
Everybody fell asleep.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you you showed the slide about the HRPP SOPs, because there is a section in there under principal and investigator responsibilities, and you can take those and use them as your own, because they were developed with the intent that sites would use them. And they have been developed, of course, and updated in accordance with the standards that we're required to be compliant with. So you can go into Skyline and take them. If you don't have access to Skyline, let us know, because when you come through our HRPP, the expectation would be that you would have a set of standard operating procedures. And some sites have used ours. Some of them had them before we had accreditation. So, I mean, and that's okay, as long as you have a set of standard operating procedures that you follow within your clinical trial area.
We have
Debbie?
some questions.
Hi, I just had a question. Quite often we get requests to add a team member to a study. And so when we go in to do that, sometimes they're not registered. So are they told beforehand that they should fill that information out, or do they not understand that? I was just curious.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, and in order to be added as a team member within the Romeo system, you do have to have an account because it'll go out and find your email address, and then that's how we find you. So if you're not registered first with a Romeo account, we can't add you as a team member. Not every team member needs to be in the Romeo system. It's only if somebody has responsibility for submitting to Romeo as a team that you should be in there. So if you're not operating in Romeo, and then sometimes teams aren't, team members aren't, then there's no need to have a Romeo account. Only those who are submitting stuff within the Romeo system, where you need to be reflected is on your delegation log. That's more important. But yeah, so you do have, if you're going to be going into the Romeo system and submitting things, you need to register for an account first, and then we can add you to the file after you've been registered and you've got an email associated with your name. Yep. Any other questions?
Yes, we have René Allemand.
Hi, Renee.
Hi, morning.
Hi.
I guess my question was I wonder if there's a way to add an archiving feature to Romeo for closed studies. Like I have a number of studies that are still there, and they're, when you log into that first page, you come out, you see everything, whether they're opened or closed. It might be nice to have the closed ones sort of, in a separate folder. Because I don't honestly access those at all, but they're always there. There's just a lot of visuals, let's say, a lot to see all at once.
Yeah.
And where, Romeo has, each study has its own Romeo number. Sometimes it's hard to remember all of those numbers.
Yeah.
When you're looking for one particular study kind of thing.
Yep. Yeah, I think Stephanie and I, we can ask if that functionality.
Yeah, we could. I'm not sure they will be able to do it, but maybe if we can have, as you said, an archived part, maybe that could be done. But the idea behind that is for you to be always aware that you have this project that were submitted. I'm not sure how they would implement that in the system, but we can try, yes.
Yeah, we can try, because you don't need to see it. It still needs to be in there, but you don't need to see it pop up on your list. Yeah.
Also, what is really important for the people to understand, you have to submit your annual approval. You have to take care of that also. You receive an email from the system for your annual approval, but there's a lot of annual approval in the system that we see that are due and not done. And also you need to close the study as well when it's done.
Yeah.
Sometimes it happens that people forget, and we have a huge list of projects that might not be still on, and we don't have anything to show us that it's done.
Yep. Another question? There's 2 hands up, right?
Yes.
It's Debbie. I just wanted to follow up with what you just said, Stephanie. I've been kind of working on a project trying to close out or get annual reapprovals for a number of studies. So I have been sending a lot of emails out to the PIs or their coordinators just to let me know what's happening, because some of them don't appear to realize that they're supposed to close their studies out. So, I send a couple of emails, and then I go ahead and they'll let me know, and then, or not. So just to let you know,
Yeah.
we're trying to follow that up.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks, Debbie. Appreciate it. Any other questions for Stephanie? Yeah, Vikram?
Yeah, I just have a quick comment on the Romeo account, the process. So we are currently at the project evaluation phase, and we just completed the recruitment. And we realized that we need to make some amendments, like minor amendments, and it's like time sensitive, so that we have to reach, meet our deadlines on different tasks on that. So wondering, is there a way like to mark or tag something like time sensitive amendment or something like that? So in case if it takes longer to do amendments. And
I think there's a section when you go in to submit something that says internal notes. So if you want to just even put in caps in that section, very time sensitive, so that as soon as it comes in, we'll see it. And like we try to process things as quickly as possible anyway, but we'll definitely take note of that and then try to move it through as quickly as possible. But there is a section there under events. There's a window where you can go in and type in, I think it's called
comments.
shared comments. That's what I would suggest, because we'll see it. We'll see it as soon as it comes in. Yeah. Does that help?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, the whole project is analyzed. So when we receive the project, everything is checked. So if you write in the comments that it's time sensitive, we will see it and would go faster.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, we do timestamp everything. So there's an audit trail from the minute it's submitted to when it goes to ORS. We have event statuses because we try to keep track of our turnaround times. So yeah, we're very cognizant of that. But anything like that could, to help you if it's really time sensitive, I think that's the best suggestion I would have for that. But we do capture everything.
Yeah, and usually the turnaround time for HRPP review is very short as well. Yeah, but as we said, comments is the best way to do.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? I know we do have the YouTube training sessions, and I'm glad that you brought those up too, Stephanie, on Skyline, but not everybody on this call has access to Skyline. So we used to do quarterly Romeo refresher sessions. So we can start those as well, and we've got a manual, but it's like 28 pages long, and sometimes it's just easier to sit in a virtual room as we walk you through the application process, because Romeo can be temperamental. Yeah, like how do you submit for departmental review within the system, and those types of things. So we'd be happy to do that. But in the interim, while we're setting up a time, if you want to look at the Romeo videos that are on the Skyline page, that at least I know a lot of people have a hard time finding their letters. When their letters are, because if they for some reason weren't copied on the letter that went out, and really it goes back to the main principal investigator and a coordinator, and if there's a whole list of people, you might not have gotten it, but there's a shared communications tab that's in the system to access your letter, so you can go in and get it.
You can have them here. You have the logs, and you'll see everything there. The share, it's a new project. It's not, and yes, I do have a lot of tabs open. Don't mind that, but you have here, you can look in your project, and you have all this stuff.
Yeah. Okay, any other questions? We'll set up that Romeo information session, maybe,
Yeah, and the Romeo refresher are all in YouTube. So if you were to if you want and you don't have access to Skyline and you want to access these, just send me an email and I will transfer them to you, like the links.
Yeah. Perfect. Okay, I see we're at 11:52. If there's no further questions for this part, maybe we'll take like 30 minutes for our lunch break. I know it's kind of right on the back of coffee break, but sometimes that's how these things happen. So I think that's okay. It is lunchtime. So why don't we come back at 12:30 and we'll start with the with Stella's section this afternoon, which is talking about, and Corinne presenting clinical trial agreements, and then you know, submitting a research study and what that means. And think about some questions too relevant to your own areas, because we're happy to take those and troubleshoot them with you right now. It would be a good opportunity to do that. Anything that you've come across that's presented kind of a challenge for you, let us know and we'll help you, either whether it's the Romeo system or whatever aspect to what you're working on. Let's work on it together. It's a good opportunity, and you've got a number of people in the virtual room here with you too, that can help to troubleshoot and to connect with them as well. So okay, let's come back at 12:30 and we'll move into the second section for this afternoon. See you soon.